The excavator arrived at 5:45 Friday morning. Not a small machine. A Caterpillar 308 with a 24-inch bucket, the kind of equipment I specify for commercial foundation work. The kind that does not arrive at residential addresses without a permit and a plan and the specific intention of doing something that will outlast everything else on the block. Karen had cut the hedges on a Monday. The excavator was on my driveway by Friday at 5:45. 4 days. I want to be precise about those 4 days because the precision matters. Karen had cut my hedges on Monday morning with the confidence of someone who has won something. She had stood at the property line at approximately 11:15 after the crew had finished and the debris had been loaded and the trucks had left, and she had looked at the open sight line between her backyard and mine with the expression of a person surveying a completed project. She had won the hedge battle. She had not understood that the hedge battle was not the war. The hedge battle was the event I had been waiting for since month 5, when I had understood what kind of person Karen was, and what kind of situation this was, and what kind of response it would eventually require. Month 5 was when I had started the wall design. Month 8 was when I had submitted the permit application. Month 11 was when the permit had been approved. Month 13 was the Monday she cut the hedges. The excavator was on my driveway at 5:45 Friday because I had called Marcus Webb at 12:03 Monday, approximately 45 minutes after Karen stood at the property line with her survey expression, and told him to move the Caterpillar from the commercial site on Elm Street to my address for Friday morning. Marcus had said, "The residential job." I said, "The residential job." He said, "The full spec." I said, "The full spec." He said, 5:30 Friday. I said, 5:45, I want to be there when it starts. I was there when it started. I was standing on my front porch with coffee at 5:43, watching the Caterpillar come off the lowboy trailer, watching Marcus's crew set up the site, watching the Friday morning dark begin to gray at the edges. Karen's house was dark. She was asleep. The excavation began at 5:49. What I built over the following 8 days, what the permit authorized, what Marcus's crew executed, what the documentation supported, and what Karen saw when she came out of her house Friday morning and looked at the equipment working along her property line, none of that was about the hedges. The hedges were 12 feet of established leyland cypress that Karen had destroyed in 4 hours with a hired crew because they blocked her view and she had run out of other options. What I built was not a hedge. What I built was the thing I had designed in month 5, permitted in month 11, and been ready to build since the month 8 approval had come through, waiting only for the moment that would make its purpose self-evident and its documentation complete. The hedges gave me that moment. Karen had given me exactly what I needed. My name is Randolph Osei, 55 years old, 31 years as a licensed structural engineer, the last 16 running my own firm specializing in heavy residential and light commercial foundation work and below-grade construction in the Carolinas. I design and build things that go into the ground and stay there. I understand concrete, masonry, soil-bearing capacity, drainage systems, and the specific permanence of below-grade construction, which is the most permanent category of construction that exists in residential applications. Things above grade can be removed. Things below grade, built correctly, do not move. My wife Teresa is a licensed real estate attorney. She has spent 20 years handling property transactions, title disputes, easement negotiations, and the legal dimensions of what private property means and what its owners are entitled to do with it. She understands property law with the professional depth of someone who has spent 2 decades seeing what happens when it is violated and what recourse exists when it is. We had moved to Millbrook, crossing 4 years before the Monday Karen cut the hedges. A 4-bedroom colonial on a generous corner lot in a 53-home HOA outside Charlotte, North Carolina, a neighborhood with the established quality of a place where people had invested in their properties and expected those investments to be respected. The leyland cypress hedges had been planted by the previous owners. 12 feet tall when we purchased the property, dense and established, providing complete visual screening between our backyard and the adjacent property, Karen's property, in all seasons. They were 14 inches inside our property line. I had the survey to confirm it, commissioned in month 3 of the Karen situation, before anything had escalated to a point that required it, because I had understood in month 3 that the situation was going to require complete documentation before it was over. Karen Whitmore Crane had moved into the adjacent property 21 months before the Monday. She was 54, former brand manager for a consumer products company, and had the specific combination of aesthetic conviction and organizational capability that makes certain disputes very difficult to conclude through normal channels. She believed the hedges blocked her morning light. She believed they created a maintenance burden on her side of the property line. She believed that in a community like Millbrook Crossing, with its maintained aesthetic standards, a hedge of this density and scale on a shared boundary was inconsistent with the visual environment she had purchased her property to inhabit. None of these beliefs constituted a legal claim on my property. But Karen was not relying on legal claims. The first HOA complaint had arrived in month 4, a formal filing alleging the hedges exceeded the community's landscaping standards for boundary plantings. The board had reviewed the CC and RS, confirmed there was no height or density restriction applicable to established landscaping predating the current homeowner's ownership, and dismissed the complaint. The second complaint had alleged drainage concerns. The hedges, Karen claimed, were directing water toward her foundation. A licensed drainage engineer I had retained in month 7, in anticipation of exactly this kind of claim, had assessed the site and produced a written report finding no drainage impact from the hedges on the adjacent property. The board dismissed the second complaint. The third complaint had alleged that the hedges constituted a view obstruction that materially affected property values in the community. Teresa had responded to this one through Leonard, our property attorney, with a letter noting that North Carolina did not recognize view easements by implication, and that the CC and RS contained no view protection provision. The board dismissed the third complaint. The fourth and fifth complaints had been variations on the aesthetic theme, each approaching the same objection from a different angle. The board had dismissed both, and the board president, a retired physician named Gerald Kimball, who had been running the Millbrook Crossing Board for 8 years with the measured patience of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome information clearly, had called me after the 5th dismissal to tell me that the board was keeping the complete file because the pattern was documentable. I told him I was keeping my own file. He said he had assumed as much. I had started the wall design in month 5 after the third complaint, not in response to the third complaint, in response to understanding, with professional clarity, what kind of person Karen was. Karen was a person who had decided on an outcome and was systematically exploring every available path to that outcome. The HOA process had 5 paths she had now tried. None of them had worked. She was going to find another path. The question was not whether she would find another path. The question was what I was going to do when she did. The wall was what I was going to do. I designed it in month 5. A reinforced concrete foundation wall, below-grade construction, running the full length of the property boundary between my yard and Karen's, with above-grade concrete masonry continuing to a height of 8 feet, the maximum permitted by the HOA's CC and RS with board approval. Below grade, the wall would extend 4 feet into the compacted subgrade, with a continuous footing at the bottom rated for the soil-bearing capacity I had assessed from the site's geological survey. Above grade, 8 courses of standard 8-inch concrete masonry unit, mortared, with core fill in the lower 4 courses and a solid cap on top. Total height above grade, 8 feet. Total depth below grade, 4 feet plus the footing. Total height from footing bottom to cap top, approximately 13 feet of concrete. The footing alone was designed to exceed the lateral loads that the soil conditions at this site could generate for the next 100 years. This was not standard residential specification. Standard residential wall footings are 18 inches deep. My footing was designed to commercial retaining wall standards because I was not building a standard residential wall. I was building something that would still be there when the house it stood beside had been demolished and rebuilt, and the neighborhood had been rezoned, and everything about the current situation was a historical footnote. I had obtained the permit in month 11. The board had approved the wall application at their regular meeting, 4-1. Karen's single ally on the board had voted against, citing aesthetic concerns. Gerald had run the meeting correctly, and the 4-1 vote was the outcome. The permit from the city had arrived 3 weeks later. I had been holding the permit for 2 months when Karen cut the hedges. She had cut them because she had exhausted the HOA process and because Leonard's response to her most recent attorney letter had made clear that the legal challenge to the hedges' existence had no viable path forward, and because she had decided, with the organizational energy of a former brand manager who understood how to execute a project, that if she could not get the hedges removed through process, she would get them removed through action. She had hired a professional tree service. She had obtained whatever she believed authorized her to act. She did not have authorization, but Karen had a talent for acting as though authorization was a formality she had dispensed with rather than a requirement she had failed to meet. The crew had arrived Monday at 8. The hedges were down by noon. I was at a commercial foundation inspection 40 minutes away. My neighbor Patricia Chen, who had a clear sight line to the property line from her kitchen window, had called me at 8:47 to tell me what was happening. I had finished the inspection because completing professional commitments is not optional, and I had driven home, and I had stood at the backyard fence and looked at the open space where the hedges had been and at Karen's backyard, now fully visible beyond it, and at Karen, standing at her patio door looking at me. I had said nothing. I had photographed everything. Then I had gone inside and called Marcus Webb and told him to bring the caterpillar. Then I had called Teresa, who was at her office. She had said, when I described what I was looking at, 4 words. She said, "Call Leonard, start now." Leonard had the criminal mischief complaint filed by end of day Monday. The hedges were 12 years old. Replacement cost of established 12-year leyland cypress at professional landscape rates was $46,000. Criminal mischief at that value was a Class H felony under North Carolina law. The civil complaint was filed Tuesday. $46,000 in property damage, remediation costs, legal fees, treble damages available under North Carolina's willful tree destruction statute. By Tuesday afternoon, Karen's attorney, a Charlotte civil litigator named James Morton, who I had never met but whose name I recognized from property dispute proceedings Teresa had handled, had called Leonard to open a discussion. Leonard had told him the wall was being built. James Morton had said the wall might be worth discussing. Leonard had said the wall was not a subject of discussion. The wall was a permitted property improvement that had been approved by the HOA board and the city 2 months ago, and that was being built starting Friday. James Morton had said his client might have concerns about the wall. Leonard had said his client had concerns about the hedges. The hedges were gone. The wall would not be. That had ended the Tuesday discussion. The excavation began Friday at 5:49. The caterpillar opened the footing trench along the full length of the property boundary, 43 linear feet, to the required depth. The excavated soil was staged in my side yard to be used as backfill after the concrete work was complete. Karen came out of her house at 7:22. I was on my back porch with my second coffee. I watched her come to her back fence and look at the caterpillar and the open trench and the staged soil and Marcus's crew working in the trench. She said, "What is that?" I said, "The foundation for the permitted concrete wall I applied for in month 8 and received approval for in month 11. She said, "You had a permit." I said, "For 2 months." She said, "Before I cut the hedges." I said, "The permit was approved November 14th. The hedges were cut January 12th. She looked at the trench, at the caterpillar, at Marcus's crew who were setting form stakes in the bottom of the trench with the efficiency of people who have done this many times. She said, "You were going to build this anyway." I said, "The permit was approved in November. I was waiting for the right moment to begin construction." She said, "The right moment." I said, "Monday provided the right moment." She looked at me for a long time. She had the expression of a person who has executed a plan and is encountering, for the first time, the evidence that the plan had been anticipated. She said, "I thought." I said, "I know what you thought." She said nothing. I went inside. The footing concrete was poured Saturday. 6 cubic yards of 4,000 psi concrete placed and consolidated correctly, the surface screeded level for the masonry that would follow. The concrete was covered and left to cure through the weekend. Masonry began Monday, exactly 1 week after Karen had cut the hedges. Marcus's crew set the first course of block on the cured footing. 8-inch standard block, laid in full mortar beds, joints finished on my side to a smooth face, left rough on Karen's side because the rough face was the natural result of the standard laying process, and I had no obligation to finish the surface on her side of the wall. 8 courses by Thursday, core fill poured and vibrated in the lower 4 courses Tuesday, the cap block set Friday morning. The wall was complete 8 days after the excavator had arrived. I stood in my backyard and looked at it. 8 feet of concrete masonry, 43 linear feet, running from the front fence line to the back fence line. The cap was smooth and level. The face on my side was finished. The face on Karen's side was standard block, not rough finished as punishment, simply the standard result of masonry construction that has not been specifically finished on the outside face. On my side, Teresa had specified a planted system, not a ledger bracket system. She had wanted something different, something that acknowledged what had been lost in the hedges while creating something new. She had specified a series of large-format planting beds at the base of the wall's inside face, running the full length, with espalier-trained ornamental trees that would, over 3 to 5 years, create a living green screen against the concrete surface. The espalier trees were not hedges. They were not going to block Karen's view from her side. They were on my side of the wall, against my face of the wall, growing against concrete that was not going to disappear. The species Teresa had chosen were ornamental pear, not the invasive calorie pear, but a disease-resistant cultivated variety that produced white spring flowers and good fall color and that trained well against a flat surface. At mature height, the espalier would reach the top of the wall. From our side, the wall would be green. From Karen's side, it would be concrete. The HOA meeting was the following Wednesday. Gerald Kimball had called it after receiving the complete documentation from Leonard, the 21-month complaint log, the 5 dismissed HOA complaints, the hedge destruction documentation, the criminal complaint, and the permit history showing the wall had been approved before the destruction. 37 of 53 households attended. Gerald presented the documentation with the thoroughness of a former physician who understood that the complete record was more important than any individual finding within it. He presented the 5 dismissed complaints. He presented Karen's pattern of escalation. He presented the permit approval date, November 14th, and the destruction date, January 12th. He presented the criminal complaint. Then he said something that I had not expected. He said, "I want to address the board's role in this situation directly." The board dismissed every complaint correctly and on its merits. What the board did not do was formally address the pattern of complaints as a separate matter from the merits of individual complaints. 5 complaints in 11 months against a single property from a single neighbor, all without merit, should have produced a formal board response to the complainant independent of the merits of each complaint. The board failed to take that step. The consequences of that failure are visible in the construction underway on the Osai property line. The room was quiet. He said the board is correcting that policy failure now. Going forward, 3 dismissed complaints from a single household regarding a single neighbor will trigger a formal board review of the complaint pattern regardless of the merits of individual complaints. He called the vote formal censure of Karen Whitmore Crane for willful destruction of a neighbor's property, 5-0. Formal adoption of the 3-complaint pattern review policy, 5-0. Formal statement of board support for the OS household's pursuit of all legal remedies, 5-0. Karen was not present. Her attorney James Morton had advised against attendance while the criminal matter was active. Karen's husband Philip was present. He sat in the 3rd row. He had been present at one previous HOA proceeding approximately 6 months ago with the quality of a man who was attending because his wife expected attendance rather than because he understood the proceedings. Tonight he had a different quality. After the meeting, in the parking lot, he came to find me. He said the permit was approved in November. I said 2 months before she cut the hedges. He said you were waiting. I said I was prepared. He said she didn't know about the permit. I said no, she had not asked. He said she thought removing the hedges would remove the reason for the wall. I said the wall doesn't need a reason, it has a permit. He absorbed this. He said she told me she was handling the hedge situation. She said it had been going on long enough and she was going to resolve it. He looked at the parking lot. I didn't ask how, I should have asked how. I said yes. He said the wall is built. I said 8 days from excavation to cap. He said and it's going to stay. I said for the life of the property. He said I'm sorry for the hedges and for 11 months before the hedges. I said I appreciate that. He said is there a path to resolution? I said Leonard and James are talking. The terms will require full restitution for the hedge value at replacement cost rates, our legal fees, and an acknowledgement that the destruction was unauthorized. He said she's going to resist the acknowledgement. I said the criminal charge makes the acknowledgement redundant as a factual matter. It is necessary as a legal one. He said I'll speak with James. He shook my hand, the handshake of a man who is ashamed and knows it and is not trying to minimize it. He drove away. Teresa was at my car. She had heard the last part of the conversation. She said he apologized. I said yes. She said, is it genuine? I said, I think so. She said the permit was November. I said he repeated that 3 times. She said he needed to hear it. I said yes. We drove home. The espalier trees arrived the following Saturday. 10 ornamental pair, each 4 feet tall in their nursery containers, delivered by the nursery in a flatbed with a lift gate. Teresa and I spent the morning installing the planting beds, amended soil, proper drainage, the specific care of people who have lost one planting to another person's decision and are not going to lose this one. The trees went into the beds at 2-foot intervals along the wall face. Teresa had done the espalier research. She had taken a course in fruit tree training the previous fall, anticipating this application. She staked each tree to the wall face and began the initial training, bending the lateral branches into the horizontal planes that would form the espalier framework over the coming seasons. I stood at the far end of the wall and watched her work. She said, without turning around, 3 seasons to the first horizontal plane, 5 seasons to full height. I said, the wall will be here. She said, I know. She finished the stake for the current tree and moved to the next. They'll bloom next spring even young, white flowers against the concrete. I said, from our side. She said, our side is the good side. I said, yes. The legal resolution came 7 weeks later. The criminal matter resolved through a plea to misdemeanor criminal mischief, reduced from the felony charge in exchange for the plea and full civil restitution. The criminal record was permanent. The civil settlement included the full replacement cost of the Hedges, $46,000, calculated at professional landscape rates, our legal fees, the remediation costs for the disturbed soil at the hedge root zone, and an acknowledgement signed by Karen, notarized, filed with the court, stating that she had willfully destroyed established landscaping on the Osai property without authorization, and that the Osai family's wall was a permitted property improvement with which she had no legal basis to interfere. She signed it. Philip had told James to accept the acknowledgement. He had told James this on a Tuesday morning, and James had called Leonard, and Leonard had called me, and I had said that was acceptable. Gerald received a copy for the HOA permanent record. He called me when it arrived. He said, "It's signed." I said, "Yes." He said, "The acknowledgement language." I said, "Is in there." He said, "She acknowledged the wall is yours, and she has no legal basis to interfere with it." I said, "Yes." He said, "In month 5, you started designing the wall." I said, "Yes." He said, 31 years of structural engineering." I said, "Yes." He said, "The espalier trees." I said, "Teresa's project. She's been training them for 5 weeks." He said, "How are they establishing?" I said, "First-year growth is on track. She says they'll bloom next spring." He said, "White flowers against the concrete." I said, "From our side." He was quiet for a moment. "Karen's side is concrete." I said, "Standard masonry face. It's not finished. It's not rough textured deliberately. It's just the natural face of laid block that hasn't been specifically treated." He said, "And our side has espalier pair." I said, "In 5 seasons." He said, "That's a very precise response to someone cutting your hedges." I said, "Structural engineers like precision." He said, "Yes," he said, "I've noticed." Karen's house went on the market in month 3 after the resolution. The listing described the property as a charming colonial with mature landscaping. The photographs were professional and showed the backyard without showing the wall, which was visible from any angle that included the back property boundary. It sold in 44 days. The new owners were a couple in their late 40s, a physician and a professor who came to introduce themselves on a Sunday afternoon. They were curious about the wall. It was visible from their backyard, and they had wondered about it during the showing. I explained that it was a permitted concrete masonry wall on our property that predated their purchase. The professor asked about the trees on the other side. I said, "Espalier ornamental pair, my wife's project." He said, "How long until they reach full height?" I said, 3 more seasons to the first full horizontal plane. Teresa estimates 5 seasons to the cap. He said, "We'll get to watch them grow." I said, "From your side, yes." He said, "What does it look like from your side?" I said, "Come over in the spring, they bloom white." He said they would like that. They came over in April, when the first bloom opened on the 3 trees that had established most strongly. White flowers against the gray concrete, the branches trained into their early horizontal planes, the whole arrangement exactly what Teresa had designed and had been working toward since the first Saturday we planted. The professor's wife, who taught art history, stood at the wall and looked at the espalier arrangement for a long time. She said, "It's beautiful." Teresa said, "Thank you, it's going to be better in 3 seasons." She said, "How long have you been working on it?" Teresa said, "We planted about a year ago. Training takes time." She said, "The concrete behind them is good. The texture works with the branches." Teresa looked at the wall, at the trees against it, at the white flowers. She said, "It works." They left. Teresa and I stood at the wall for a moment. She said she cut the hedges to get her view back. I said, yes. She said, and now there's a concrete wall with espalier pair on our side. I said, in 5 seasons, it will be better than the Hedges. She said, it already is. I said, yes. She went inside. I stood at the wall for a while longer. 8 feet of concrete masonry, 43 linear feet, 4 feet below grade and 4-foot footing below that. The trees against the inside face, the white flowers, the concrete behind them going nowhere. The wall had been designed in month 5, permitted in month 11, built in 8 days after the Monday Karen had cut the hedges. 31 years of structural engineering. You learn to build for the outcome, not the obstacle. The obstacle was gone, the wall was here. And in the spring, it had white flowers. Framed thumbnail text. She cut my hedges on Monday. The excavator arrived Friday at 5:45 a.m.